think one of the most misunderstood of Australian native family would be the eucalyptus gum tree. A very hard tree to grow and to grow successfully. They tend to be very apically dominant. What I mean by that is the top of the tree on a gum tree is extremely vigorous compared to the rest of the tree. And a characteristic of not only the gum tree but Angophora as well, which is often confused with the gum tree, is that they'll shoots come out from the main, which grow very strongly. And what that shoot will do is you'll have your main branch here, you'll have the shoot come straight up. And the shoot becomes very dominant to the point where it actually draws most of the energy of the plant, particularly out of that one branch. And if it's left unchecked, it will often kill off that branch at that point from where it's grown. So a lot of people don't realise that because of the nature of how they are, they're their own worst enemies. They're a little bit more dicey to grow, but worth the effort. Probably my experience with gum trees, Eucalyptus nicolai, which is the peppermint-scented gum tree with a tiny little leaf, is one that I've had the most amount of success with. Very easy to grow, behaves very well. It also grows with what we call the lignin tuber on the base of it, which is like a big lumpy part, very similar to what you see growing the base on these old Banksias. And in a lot of cases, if you find it on a nicolai and you don't like the whole top of the tree, you can cut the tree off flush with that lignin tuber, which is that big bulbous part coming out of the ground down here, and the whole tree will grow from that point. Some people have had success in actually digging a third of the root system at a time and encouraging a fibrous root system to grow closer to the point where they want to actually dig the plant out of the ground. So they are a bit of a challenge to get them out of the ground and safely into bonsai culture. The easiest way, if you've got the patience, is to grow them from a seedling or a young tree from the nursery, but that takes many years. And it's not always going to be a journey of, I guess, of what you want. Most Banksias are pretty close to it. They've got a good soft fibrous root system as well, so that's why you'll find that most people have lots of success with Banksias. Probably the one that most people grow, don't really think too much about, is the ficus family. I know Bob's a big ficus fan. The ficus is probably the most underrated of them all. And obviously we've got many indigenous ficus species here, obviously in Australia. But what I brought here is typically the things that people don't even use as Australian native plants to bonsai, or things that will give you ideas of what to try. This particular tree here is a Beckia, Australian native. It's a dwarf Beckia species, so it's naturally a small foliaged and small flower plant. It's got beautiful, tiny little white flowers that come on it very soon actually. It's just getting ready to set its buds. And then it just profusely grows, almost like a hedge. And you can treat this plant like a topiary, virtually, and cut it to whatever, I guess, arrangement that you like. It's got a beautiful old textured bark, as you can see when it gets old, and it's quite an easy tree to grow. It doesn't seem to need any special treatment, and it doesn't turn up its tails if you root prune it like a lot of the Australian natives will. The biggest, I think, threat to any Australian native tree is the root pruning cycle. How often you do it, and how aggressive you are when you do it. In a lot of cases, if you're as aggressive with Australian native trees as you are with your exotic European trees, that could be the reason why a lot of them die. What I do with them as far as maintenance and looking after them, they're not any different than any exotic tree to look after. They require the same stuff that you do for your Japanese maples and your junipers, your pines, etc. They need to be watered when they're dry, they need to be fed, and they need to have their roots pruned, because otherwise they become a down in container. So they're still treated exactly the same way as far as their care and maintenance. Timing of a lot of these root pruning varies. Most of these Melaleucas and Beckias, I can root prune these at the same time you root prune most exotic trees. As long as I'm not too aggressive with my root pruning, I have great success in pruning these in spring quite safely, as long as I'm not too aggressive. You don't want to take off any more than approximately a quarter of the root system. You'll find this naturally is a fibrous root system as well. Another thing that I wanted to do with Australian native plants is to, I guess particularly these types of Melaleucas, is show them as you would see them out into the real world there, struggling against the elements. And what you'll notice with them, or what I notice with my eyes when I look at them, is I notice that they've only got foliage on the very tips of the branches, and they've got lots of structural wood that you can see. And because they're in the harsh elements, they've only got a limited amount of foliage on the tops of a lot of their branches, and that tends to reflect, I guess, the struggle that they're trying to live, particularly in the elements by the sea, where it's quite hostile compared to what a little plant will survive. So you'll notice that a lot of them will only have light foliage around the outside, and you'll see a lot of the structure of the tree itself. They do have dieback. There's no mistake in that. You'll notice on this particular old melaleuca, there is dieback. I will have branches dieback, whether I like it or not. If I knew why, I could correct it, but they seem to have controllable dieback occasionally, where you'll have in here, you'll have a branch dieback by itself. But you can see that one of the advantages of these trees is when a lot of your other trees are asleep or dormant, these trees grow, and they tend to grow when the growth conditions are at optimum for these plants. So when it's not so hot, it's not unusual when a lot of the other plants are semi-dormant for Australian natives to grow, particularly to shoot out. And they'll always be the first trees that you'll see shooting out compared to a lot of your exotic. So a lot of my melaleucas are in full growth in winter. And in summer, they'll go dormant. It's too hot for them to support the growth, but they know that not to stop growing on their own back without waiting for a false dormancy like a lot of exotic trees. So they will respond to the elements, and they will want a really hot period, particularly during summer. They will stop their growth and just sit there and sulk. Well, not really sit there, so I'll just sit there and wait for the weather to turn. Then they'll start growing again. I've always was taught, and I've always played around with the recruiting on eucalyptus gum trees, is that one of the advantages of them is the claim is that you can root prune a gum tree almost throughout the whole growth cycle, provided you wait for the new growth to harden up and mature. And before it breaks into new growth, that is supposedly the key period, key time that you have to root prune them safely, because they're in between a dormancy period. So what I've done over the years, I've experimented with that to see whether it makes a lot of difference, and I've had a lot of success with the gum trees I've grown by root pruning them in between new growth, maturity, and then obviously the new growth after that growth. So you wait for the leaves to grow. I'll show you one that I've brought in now what that means. You wait for that to harden up and mature, and then just before the new flush starts, that's the same period, obviously, to root prune the trees themselves. Now you'll notice here that they're very gnarly and twisty and wiry, and they're certainly not reflective of what you'd see an exotic tree arrangement growing. And I've tried to enhance that where I can. You can safely wire these trees. You'll hear a lot of false rumours that you can't wire Australian native trees. Well, I've been wiring them for years and I've never had a tree die from being wired. It's usually something else, or you've bent the branches far too much where you wire and broken and canted along here, and that's why they don't respond. So I've had great success with wiring any of these trees, and most of these trees have been wired at some stage during their life. You'll see here, big banks like this, here's had wiring on for way over a year, and it hasn't had a negative impact on it at all. There are some people that will tell you that when you prune a eucalyptus gum tree, you should seal the cut straight away, because the thought is that they're hollow internally, and if you don't, you'll have a branch die back. Because I've often had people say to me, I've pruned branches on my eucalyptus gum tree and they die back for no reason at all. And some people say that I seal it and the problem goes away. So I've done both methods and had mixed success with both. But for those people that do it, particularly the gum trees, they get the little sealing paste and they seal the cut as soon as they cut it off, and they claim that that stops whatever dieback problems they've had. I've never had dieback problems from pruning gum trees, other than by too much pruning and being far too vigorous with the tree. But if you want to try, if you've got a gum tree and you've had limited success with when you prune it back and you have the branches die back, you can try sealing the cuts and see whether that works for you or not on wood. If you know how the species reacts, and this particular species here will shoot back from old wood. This species will, Skypholotes, but with mixed fortunes, I guess. I can safely cut most of the foliage off this tree here, these white cloud bractea, melaleucas, and know that it will shoot back like a rose tree will. So what happens if it gets too leggy, I can cut the whole plant back. And this particular tree was cut back about 2 years ago, almost to a rosebush type pruning before obviously the growth cycle. So I cut every single foliage off these plants and forced it to grow back closer to the trunk line because it was getting long and leggy and it was losing the appeal of the scale perspective. So you can cut certain melaleucas back to virtually nothing and they will reshoot. What I would suggest you do is if you've got an old melaleuca, like Greek Glade one here, is you go and buy a cheap one and experiment with it first. Don't go, oh well, it's worked for this one, I'm going to try it on my 40-year-old tree here and hope that it works because it could die. So it's best to try and find a young juvenile species the same and experiment with it and see. So I know this one does. This one here tends to shoot back with no guarantees. And I've been struggling for the last probably 6 years to try and bring the foliage closer and closer into the tree. And if you don't control that energy and push the energy back down to the trees, you'll have growth problems with lower branches becoming weak and unable to hold the foliage like they should. And that same rule applies with every single bonsai tree you grow. Your whole journey is about trying to control the vigor of the tree, whether it's Australian native or exotic tree like that. You've got to try and balance the energy of your tree. And depending on how old your tree is, will determine what method you use to balance the energy. Younger trees are very, very vigorous, and therefore they require a lot more perseverance, whereas the older trees are slower to grow, and they're easy to control.
Trevor?
Yes?
How large did you let this get when you were growing on for the trunk?
This tree, pretty much, was about this big when I put it into this bonsai container, so it was about that big.
Yeah.
And it got that big in about 7 years.
And did you let it grow really tall, or just kept it squat?
Kept it squat and kept working on it, but it did have some sacrifice branches in here that you can't see now. They're cool, so there were a couple of sacrifice branches that were allowed to shoot off, obviously, to help fatten up like this. It was an interesting experiment that the people used to grow on. I got my hands on this tree pretty much after its forced growth in this type of container. Obviously, it was more of a grow container. I got it was in a growth container. But typically, the methods are very similar to how you would if you were going to field grow any plant. You've just got to be selective about what sacrifice branches you go and which ones you use and where you grow them, so that if you do have large scars to heal, that those scars are not visible from the front. And typically field growing, which is an old trick we used when I worked in the nursery industry, is about trying to force the trunk to grow as fast and as quickly as you can, because trees like this are a lot more sellable than small little trunk trees like this, because people are amazed and I get excited by the size of the trunk and over the distance. So the same principle is the same. If you take a small bonsai tree like this, and you need to understand this, or even those little leaf pillar seedlings that will be handed out and stuff, and you put it into a small bonsai container, and you leave it in that bonsai container, and you water it and nurture it, in 5 years' time it will not grow hardly at all. The reason being, it just doesn't have the ability to run off and power off, because it doesn't have the soil to run, it doesn't have the vigour, because it doesn't have enough soil for its roots to really get its hole into, therefore the tree won't grow as well. So you need to, if you're going to force trees to grow, you need to let them take off, but you also need to control certain branching, because you're going to grow sacrifice branches to force the trunk to grow to the diameter you want, and eventually you're going to have to cut off those sacrifice branches. And what I mean by sacrifice branches, you could have a branch on this tree that grows as high as the ceiling, and its only reason to be on that tree is to force the trunk to grow as thick as you want. But while it's there, you've got to make sure that that sacrifice branch doesn't weaken any branches that you intend to use, or any branches that have a future on the tree. Certain trees, particularly exotic trees, you don't have to worry about branches. Chinese elm trees are a prime example. You don't really have to worry about branches being weakened by a sacrifice branch, because if you grow the trunk this thick, cut all the branches off it, heal all the scars up, hide them, and grow a whole complete new set of branches. And I've done that for many, many years, particularly on Chinese elm. That's why they're so successful as bonsai trees, is they're easy to grow, and you can force a Chinese elm tree in the ground, get the trunk you want, cut it off, and grow a whole new set of branches because they're predictable. You know how they will respond. Whereas these family here are not so predictable. That's why people are a bit nervous about them. But it doesn't mean you can't experiment with them and learn by how the tree responds. Very important to, obviously, to get in there and try, and don't be scared of the tree. If you have a failure, try and work out why you had a failure. Try and understand what it is you may have done wrong, or may have done that contributed to the death of the tree. I often come across these old 15 to 20-year-old containerised plants in the country nurseries, so particularly around some of the country towns up near Bendigo and Shepparton and those sorts of places. You'll go into some of those smaller nurseries and you'll have 10 of these types of plants that he's had in the back of his nursery for the last 20 years. And I've found so many eucalyptus nicolai trees that way over the years, and I've sold them all off instead of keeping a few of them, which I should have, because they're not easy to find anymore. But every now and again you'll go walking to a little country nursery and you'll find a plant. This has been growing in this container all its life. It's probably 15 to 20 years old, and it's been containerised all of that time. It's an old tree. It's not evergreen style as far as growing into a bonsai as such. I'd still treat it with the same principles I would when I was designing any kind of tree. I'd say I want to have some form of branching around the tree, not necessarily growing straight down like that, but more competing in an upward style. But I still want to have them coming up the tree, so I don't necessarily want to have where it branches here. Automatically you've got a branch on the inside of a curve. The design rules tell you that that's incorrect. And whether you know it to be incorrect or not, it just looks incorrect without even knowing it. And I've often said to my students over the years that if you design a tree well, it will look well. If you design a tree badly, you'll know it's bad because it just won't look right. And your brain says there's something not right, and you may not know what you've done wrong, but your eyes tell you that it's bad, and you've done, I guess, a poor design. So trust your eyes, even if you know nothing about artistic design. When you style a tree, stand back and look at it, your eye will tell you whether or not it looks good or doesn't look good. So typically, what I want to do is I want to try and have some branches out here, moving up to a head up here. So typically, if I'm going to style the tree, I'm going to take off, as I would an any normal tree, a branch off the side. Now, you can get away with writing the branches if you want to. What I mean by that is you can get away with 90-degree angle branches if you're going to leave two branches from the same junction. So I could leave this branch here if I was going to, but this tree is quite young, quite juvenile, and in theory, these branches, once they get the bigger, will take off and fill the foliage. So I don't really want to have a 90-degree angle, unless it's an absolute necessary. So I'm going to pick the strongest dominant branch, which is this one. I'm going to take this one off as well. So I don't really want that. So typically all I've got is I've got branch here, branch here, branch here. It's not necessarily side back side, but I've got them alternating up the tree. I've got a branch here that I can alternate up the tree too if I want to pull one up here. And I've got a head here, or a head there that I can wire up and become the tree. And I can put the wire on the tree and I can actually start to bring the branches as to where I want them to start. I guess the bare bones of the designer tree. The biggest danger to any tree, no matter whether it's an Australian native or an exotic tree, if it's been grown in a plastic container for many, many years, it'll be extremely root bound and it will be used to being in this container. So you can see if you look at the root system, it's quite compact, it's in there. It's not too tight, it's not a massive impenetrable roots, but if I root prune this, cut off some branches, wire it up, it could be a recipe for disaster. Because this tree's been growing in this container for so long, it could be too much stress all at once. So with a tree like this, I may decide to take my time. So I might prune the branches and wire the tree and leave it and do nothing more for that season. If anything, I might take it out of this container, get 2 or 3 containers bigger than this, cut them down, and put it into that, keep the root system as shallow as I can, but more exposed to you. So typically what I'll do with this tree now is put some wire on it, just decide where the branches are going to go, and then work, and leave it like that and do no more on this particular tree. So I just leave it like that by just simply wiring know, because I don't really want to risk the tree. It's quite old. It's not worth trying to put it into this container, unless of course I can find one that I can sit it straight into. Then it's really going to look a little bit silly. So what I do is I wait till later on this year, or I may even wait till next year, and then I'll prune it down and put it into a bonsai container. Maybe not quite the full-size container would go into, but at least put it down in the container. Or I might watch the growth. You see here, this new growth I was talking about, you see the old growth that goes green. So in theory, the safe time for this type of trees, when this new growth hardens, changes from red to green, just before the point where these new shoots take off. In theory, that's the safe time for the root prune this plant. So I could, in theory, save the root prune, and I've done that and had good success and not had a failure with it, I guess, these types of trees. So what I would do if I was going to root prune, I'd wait till all this growth hardens off, and then I would root prune the roots. And I'd just be patient and wait, because it may take some time before the growth hardens off, and obviously it's ready to root prune. So typically, just with wiring this tree would make 100% difference to it. I don't know whether you want me to wire up or whether you've seen enough trees wired up in your time here, but typically just wire, and here, wire, and there. Obviously pull it out, fold it out to where you want, decide where the head's going to be, and just start to grow the tree on from that point. Yes.
The soil mixture you use to repot any of those trees on the table, what would you use, Trevor?
Interesting question is the question of soil mix. Remember I said there's more than one road to road. Every person you talk to will have their favourite recipe for soil and what works for them. We could lecture all night long just on the complexities of soil and what doesn't work. I always mix up my own modeler, so I would have over the many years, and I've changed the recipes so many times during the course of the time. I've been using a product called diethylmine over the last two and a half years, but we were pointed in that way by an extremely experienced bonsai grower who's been using it for many, many years. So what I've been doing, experimenting with a couple of other people that I'm associated with, is we've been using a mix of diethylmine, 3 to 7 millimetre pine bark or orchid mix, and some cocoa peat crushed, mix the lot together in the right consistency, which gives you a very open but light draining mix. So what that means is it halves the weight, because you must have some drainage in your soil mix. Most people use propagating sand, which is quite heavy, short, between 3 and 7 millimetre pieces of propagating sand, and that's quite heavy. And then they use typical pine bark, and they might throw some other ingredients in there, and that's your typical, what we call in the commercial industry, soilless potting mix. The biggest advantage I find with the zeolite is half the weight of your typical propagating sand, so therefore it's a lot lighter to lift your plants up when you pop it, and it stays open a lot longer. And what's really important for any plant, whether it's an Australian native or an exotic tree, is you need air around the root system. You need good open soil mix. So a good aerated soil mix is crucial, and it's crucial because these trees have to be watered so many more times than your plants in the garden. And what happens is every time you water them, the organic compound in the soil mix, which could be dirt, could be sticks, could be pine chips, starts to break down and decompose. With anything, particularly pine bark, as it decomposes, it goes slightly acidic as well, but the soil particle goes smaller and smaller. So by having a good drainage mix in there, it keeps the soil mix open a lot more, it keeps it from breaking down and becoming suffocating to the root system, allows good water penetration. So typically what I've been using, and I've been quite happy to put my Australian names in, would be a mix of zeolite, obviously, of the product we've been using, and obviously the pine bark as well, diethylmine. But we've heard that diethylmine's getting hard to get hold of now, because where it's mined, there's a bit of a problem at the moment, but we were buying the diethylmine through Sage Horticulture in Cheltenham. But I'm sure if you used any of the other types of open product that you would find in the, some of your commercial type plant propagators, particularly your, your hydroponic style people, and even like those types of things, I'm pretty sure you could use some of that in preference. But I think what's crucial in any soil mix is it needs to be open, so it needs to have the addition of typical, you see this just propagating sand in here, it's just standing everyday pebble mix, which is sharp rather than obviously smooth. This is a typical commercial mix in this one here, and in these ones, I don't think these here haven't been put into the new mix. This particular one in here has. You can see if you come up and have a look at the top of the surface here, you'll see there's, I'll pass them around to you so you can have a look. The zeolite's quite sharp, it's quite thin. It seems to have good properties as far as drainage goes. And it locks up the nutrients a lot better and holds them and then releases them to the plant. So typically, you can see there if you want to pass that around, that's zeolite there. Make sure it's got plenty of drainage in it. Typically, most soil mixes, commercial ones you buy, have orchid mix and some form of drainage, usually trace elements, and then they have a peat moss or a cocoa peat tile added into it as well. So don't be scared to experiment. Mix up a soil mix that suits your plants, and also how much time you've got to put into your plants. You've got to remember, if you make a soil mix that's extremely open and you're not home enough times to water your trees, it could be detrimental to the health. So you need to play around with your soil ratios to make sure that it actually is, I guess, conducive to the way that the time you can spend on your bonsai. I find with the liquid organic fertilisers, I don't have any negative side effects from any of my Australian native plants. Experiment. The tree will tell you, the colour will tell you, the growth will tell you whether it's not as happy. You'll recognise fertiliser very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, because it will discolour the tree very quickly. You can see these trees are extremely healthy. There's no sign of fertiliser burn on any of them as such. I think.
Trevor, this one here where you've cut it off and it hasn't grown back,
yeah.
What's the option there? Can you cut it back further and hope it grows back again?
It's pretty much dead all well on here, so it's withdrawn the sap all well on here. So there's really no option with this other than to gin it and make, I guess, a feature of it if I want to keep it. It would grow back from here, provided I cut every single branch here off and force it to grow back from there. But I'd have to cut everything off, so it's not really worth it. So typically, I'll just do this. Carve it out with a little carving tool, looks like. You've seen a little slight carving tool, haven't you? For carving or things like that. It's quite common to see gins on Australian edges, particularly those growing on the beach. They get a lot of, I guess, abuse and they have to cope with it a lot. But it's typically just a little side carving tool designed to shape it. Ideal for something like that to carve it off rather than trying to use the drag on something that fine. I've cut this right back into here, virtually right back to nothing, constantly all over the tree. As long as it's got some tuft there, it will pull itself and pull the sap up and still reshoot. You see it's reshooting everywhere, it's just pretty much come out as dorsey cycle. So the biggest problem with particularly tree design is to try and bring the fibres constantly back into the tree and not have it become marching too far from the actual plant itself. They were just 6-year-old seedlings when I got them, and they were sitting in the corner of a nursery here in Melbourne, just been totally neglected for the last 6 years. I was surprised they were alive, but they were all upright, and I bent them and shaped them, and over a period of time I got them into a container, and they survived. It was worth the risk. But you will sometimes walk in the nursery and find something that's already quite old, just from neglect, that could go into a composition like this and become quite a nice little artistic merited, I guess, design. And over time they will only get better. It will only improve as I get more compact foliage. If I've been able to fit my big one into the car, you would have seen what these things can look like. So I've got a huge big one at home that's probably about that long, and trunk signs like that. And they're beautiful melody to work with. And you can get them to sweep along the ground and come up and have contorted branches and twisted heads. They look absolutely sensational as far as an Australian native goes.